Well, hello, teachers and students. Thanks for clicking on my video. My name is Don Kobayashi, and I'm going to talk with you a few minutes about one of my passions, the fascinating world of ocean plankton. First, a little bit about myself. I'm a research fishery biologist at NOAA Fisheries, Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center. I work in a group called the Pelagic Research Program within a larger group called the Ecosystem Sciences Division. I've been at NOAA for 34 years, but originally from the mainland. I grew up in Arizona, got my undergraduate degree at the University of Arizona, and I came to Hawaii for graduate school. I got my master's degree in biological oceanography at UH Manoa, and then started working at NOAA. Along the way between then and now, I got my PhD in environmental sciences at the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. My role at NOAA is primarily scientific research, like you see in these photos here, where I'm working on one of our NOAA ships with plankton and micronecton, sort of the larger versions of plankton. So mainly I do science, but I readily embrace opportunities like this to help work with some of the next generation of scientists. One of my passions that I want to share with you is ocean plankton. And plankton are the life's blood of the ocean, arguably of the entire planet. They're a critical part of the ecosystem, from providing oxygen, providing the base, the foundation of the food webs in the ocean, and also hosting some of the most vulnerable stages, the life history stages of many things that we're more familiar with. I encourage you to check out the 6-minute TED Talk that's in Student Corner Plankton. It'll talk to you a lot about the different varieties of plankton, the sheer diversity of forms. A lot of things you see in this cool picture will be talked about in that TED Talk. It's definitely an entertaining lesson in marine plankton, so please check out that TED Talk in the link in Student Corner. Plankton are quite cool, and let's talk a bit about one of my personal favorites. Now here's something we caught off the NOAA ship using one of our large plankton nets. It's in the tray. Let's watch and see what it looks like, or maybe more fittingly, what it doesn't look like. Check it out. What is that? Did you see it in the water in the tray? Once it's in my hand, you can get an idea of what it looks like. It's definitely not small. It's one of the larger members of the plankton. And this particular creature does fit the definition of plankton, which it comes from the Greek word planktos, wanderer or drifter. That's what defines plankton. They drift or wander around in the ocean at the mercy of ocean currents. This is one of the larger ones that drifts around. Here's a view of another example of that creature. What do you think it is? Well, if you guessed baby lobster, you're right. It's a baby lobster, or the larval form, what scientists would call it. It's probably a slipper lobster, sort of what you see at the bottom of this picture, but even things as basic as identification of planktonic forms is very difficult. So we may not actually be sure what that baby larva of a lobster is, but it's probably a slipper lobster, maybe a spiny lobster as you see on the top. But as you can tell, the larval forms of many things can look quite different when they're in the plankton than when they grow up on the reef. So aside from the very basic question of knowing what is what, there's a host of scientific questions that remain unanswered about ocean plankton. And I just want to run through a few of them because they may inspire you or your students' science projects in the future. Now, here's a few questions. These are just ones that I thought of fairly quickly. I'll just read through a few of them. Let's see, how fast can plankton swim for how long? How do plankton navigate? How do plankton keep from sinking? These are some basic questions about movement, and we know very little about plankton movement. We do know that it's not a clear-cut case of some plankton can swim and some can't. There's a whole range of plankton movement. Some can swim a little bit, some can't. Even something as simple as a fish egg may have its own quirky behavior. It may change its buoyancy. So a fish egg may sink or float depending on its stage of development. How do plankton cope with pollution? How will they cope with dirty, turbid water? Do plankton get washed up on shore? Going back to the movement thing again. How do plankton cope with ocean waves, air bubbles in the water? How much oxygen do the plant-type plankton produce? And this is a very important question because much of the air we breathe is produced by plankton. Can plankton have enough food to eat? Can they avoid being eaten themselves? Why do some plankton light up? Something called bioluminescence. Why are some plankton clear, like that cool lobster larva you saw earlier, and some plankton may be pigmented or dark? Do plankton school? Well, kind of related to schooling, there's another question. Do plankton learn? Do they have behaviors that can change depending on their experience? How will plankton cope with climate change? Will the saltiness of the ocean have an impact? Will the pH of the ocean have an impact? What about temperature, ocean warming? Well, there are so many questions. This is just a few, but there's many, many more that remain unanswered about the fascinating world of marine plankton. And I encourage you to think more about it, come up with your own questions to answer. And if you find something really interesting, please stay in touch. Here's my email at the bottom, donald.kobayashi@noaa.gov. Please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to communicate more with you about plankton. Good luck to you and your students, and please stay in touch.